The Middle East is once again at the center of a rapidly intensifying geopolitical crisis, one that is not only reshaping regional alliances, but also threatening global economic stability. What began as a chain of retaliatory strikes has now evolved into a full-scale regional confrontation. Iran's military responses following attacks on its territory, including strikes linked to the broader U.S.-Israel conflict, have ignited a wave of missile and drone assaults across the Gulf. Critical infrastructure has been hit, oil routes have been disrupted, and perhaps most significantly, a new political alignment is beginning to take shape. At the heart of this shift is a growing sense among Gulf and Islamic nations that they must now act collectively, possibly without relying on traditional Western security guarantees. The current crisis traces back to late February 2026, when joint U.S. and Israeli strikes targeted Iran, reportedly resulting in the killing of Iran's supreme leader and significant damage to strategic facilities. In response, Tehran launched a sweeping campaign of retaliation. Iranian forces have since carried out missile and drone attacks across multiple countries, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain. These strikes have targeted not only military installations, but also civilian infrastructure, oil refineries, gas terminals, desalination plants, and residential zones. The scale of disruption has been unprecedented. Reports indicate that key energy facilities such as Qatar's Ras Laffan terminal and Saudi Arabia's Aramco infrastructure have been impacted, while shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for nearly 20% of the world's oil supply, has nearly come to a halt. The consequences have rippled across the globe. Oil prices have surged, supply chains have been strained, and industries reliant on energy and raw materials are already feeling the pressure. Against this volatile backdrop, a significant political development has emerged, a coordinated response from a bloc of Arab and Islamic nations. In Riyadh, foreign ministers and representatives from countries including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Turkey, and Pakistan convened for high-level talks. The outcome was a rare joint statement, one that signaled both unity and urgency.
The coalition accused Iran of carrying out unjustified attacks on civilian and economic targets, warning that continued aggression could destabilize not just the region, but the global economy. This gathering marks one of the most unified responses from the Islamic world in recent years.
Historically divided by political, sectarian, and strategic differences, these nations now appear to be aligning under a shared perception of threat. At the forefront of this response is Saudi Arabia, whose leadership has adopted an increasingly assertive tone. Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan has emerged as a central voice, delivering some of the most direct criticisms of Iran since the conflict began. He said, as we have repeatedly warned of the risks of continuing escalation policies, seeking to spare the region further tension out of our shared awareness and commitment to let wisdom prevail through peaceful solutions. But his remarks quickly turned sharper, directly accusing Iran of undermining regional stability. He said Iran's insistence on violating the principles of good neighborliness has eroded trust in it regionally and internationally. He continued by highlighting the humanitarian and economic consequences of the attacks. He said, we stress the urgent need to immediately stop Iranian attacks and reject Iran's attempts to shirk responsibility for these assaults, which targeted residential areas as well as civilian and critical facilities, causing human losses and significant material damage to the national interests of Arab and Islamic countries. These statements reflect a broader shift in Saudi policy. While the kingdom had previously pursued cautious diplomacy, officials now signal that trust has been deeply damaged. A key point of contention has been Iran's justification for targeting bases and facilities linked to the United States. Tehran has argued that its actions are defensive, aimed at countering U.S. military presence in the region. But Saudi Arabia has categorically rejected this narrative. He said, I believe this weak argument of targeting the U.S. presence should not convince any reasonable person who sees the facts. He explained that Gulf nations had already made their positions clear before the conflict escalated. He said these states would not allow their territories to be used in any way to attack Iran, and that any presence of friendly countries there would be limited to self-defense. He further clarified the nature of U.S. involvement in the region. He said even in the kingdom, most of the U.S. presence is related to anti-ISIS operations under the anti-ISIS coalition. Ultimately, he accused Iran of using these claims as a cover for broader strategic ambitions. He said all these excuses and reasons are an attempt by Iran to cover up the strategic truth, which is that it is pursuing a policy of blackmail to achieve political goals. And then came the clearest warning yet. He said, what I want the Iranian side to understand is that neither the kingdom nor the Gulf states will accept blackmail. Beyond the immediate military confrontation, one of the most critical aspects of this crisis is the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway connects the Persian Gulf to global markets and is responsible for transporting a significant share of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas. Since the conflict began, shipping through the strait has been severely disrupted. Iranian threats and attacks on vessels have led to a dramatic decline in traffic. The implications are profound. Any prolonged disruption could trigger a global energy crisis, driving up costs for fuel, food, and industrial goods. Even fertilizers essential for agriculture are affected, raising concerns about food security in vulnerable regions. The crisis has also exposed growing uncertainty in global leadership. In Washington, concerns are mounting over the economic and military costs of the conflict. American policymakers have acknowledged the strain on resources and the challenges of rallying international support. One voice described the consequences starkly. He said, in the president's war of choice with Iran, a war that has already killed 13 service members, cost Americans taxpayers billions of dollars, and scrambled supply chains from oil to fertilizer to aluminum. At the same time, efforts to build a coordinated international response have faced obstacles. He said nobody answered the call when the president asked our allies to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. This perceived hesitation has not gone unnoticed in the Gulf. As traditional alliances are tested, a critical question is emerging. Could this moment lead to the formation of a new security bloc within the Islamic world? The idea of an Islamic NATO has been discussed before, but it has never fully materialized due to competing interests among member states. Now, however, the conditions may be shifting. The Riyadh meeting demonstrated an unprecedented level of coordination. Countries that often pursue independent or even opposing policies are now speaking with a unified voice against Iran's actions. This does not yet constitute a formal military alliance, but it signals a shift toward greater collective security thinking driven by shared vulnerability. While diplomacy remains the stated preference, the possibility of military action is increasingly being discussed. Saudi Arabia has made it clear that its patience has limits. Officials have indicated that continued attacks could trigger direct retaliation. Behind the scenes, defense coordination among Gulf states is intensifying. Air defense systems are being reinforced. Intelligence sharing is increasing, and contingency planning is underway. The risk of escalation remains high. Any direct confrontation between Gulf states and Iran could quickly draw in external powers, turning a regional conflict into a broader global crisis. The economic fallout is already being felt worldwide. Energy markets have reacted sharply with oil and gas prices rising. Countries heavily dependent on imports are facing shortages and rising costs. Industries reliant on stable supply chains are under pressure.
From manufacturing to agriculture, disruptions are spreading across sectors. Even countries far removed from the conflict are feeling the impact, underscoring how interconnected the global economy has become. For now, the situation remains fluid. Diplomatic efforts continue with international calls for de-escalation and the protection of civilian infrastructure. But the underlying tensions remain unresolved.
Iran continues to assert its position, while Gulf nations signal that they will no longer tolerate attacks on their territory. The formation of a unified regional bloc could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. Whether this unity endures or fractures under pressure will determine the next phase of this crisis. What is unfolding is more than a confrontation. It is a turning point. A region long shaped by external influence is beginning to assert its own collective direction. Traditional alliances are being questioned. New alignments are emerging. And the message from the Gulf is increasingly clear, firm, coordinated, and uncompromising.